So I'm very excited now. I would like to introduce our concluding panel for the 2023 EV Summit in partnership with Electric Drives, which is currently tracking as the fastest growing transport channel on LinkedIn. So well done, Aid and team. So with our final panel then, we'll build upon the valuable learnings we've gathered across the 2 days of the EV Summit, and we'll provide a really in-depth review of the current state of the UK's EV landscape, covering aspects such as technology, sustainability, availability, and of course, policy. I would now like to invite our esteemed speakers for this session to join me on the stage. So please then join me in welcoming Isabel Sheldon, founder of Oak Polytech Consultancy, Maria Bengston, director and partner at EY, Melanie Shufflebotham, co-founder and COO at ZapMap, and Dora Clark, head of marketing and communications at Osprey Charging Network, and Catherine Fairs, Chief Operating Officer at Auto Trader UK, who joins us via Zoom. And just a note to our audience, please can you dream up your juiciest questions for once we've spoken to the panel to really stimulate a great debate. That would be fabulous. So let's get into setting the e-mobility world straight then. Catherine from Auto Trader, joining us online. May I turn to you first? So for our first question, since 2030 became 2035, as we are all very aware, so Auto Trader Insights shows that the in-market buyers haven't been put off, but actually those who weren't interested are now even less interested, and that's certainly what I'm picking up anecdotally as well. So, Catherine, what are the key actions we can take to help those who are sitting on the fence?
Thanks. Well, I think, firstly, let's look around the room. I think it's vital that we step out of our electric car world and acknowledge that the people we need to appeal to don't currently have a presence here. They're not on this journey with us. Gaining a deeper understanding of that audience, of who those people are, is definitely going to be vital to getting to that electric mass adoption moment. I think if we focus on empathy and trying to see things from their point of view, whether it's the confusing media headlines, a government telling them one thing and then another thing, the pictures on social media at Christmas with all those really long queues, we have a better shot at understanding how to address their real concerns if we're listening and focusing on that empathy. And we all know the answers, we know the explanations, we know the context to all of the above situations and moments, but we can't expect everyone else to have that detail of the why and the how these things have happened. So in terms of practical next steps, we really do need to see that segmentation. We need to break down the challenge into a series of steps. So if we focus on who is next, who's easiest to convert, and what's stopping that next group from getting there. So we know that about 60% of the UK population have driveways, but less than 3% of the cars on the road are electric. So there's a big section of people there for whom electric could be a great option and who the switch shouldn't be too much of a barrier, but they're not making that switch for a variety of reasons. Within this group, we then need to look at differences in age, differences in gender, differences in all those other characteristics of that segment to find out where our next focus should be. And once we understand that, we can then focus on the right messages to move that group from low engagement into in-market car buyers. And then we need to get to the next group and the next group and keep on that journey. So we're breaking down those segments of consumers cohort by cohort and really appealing to the worries, the concerns that they have and helping them to get over those hurdles.
Thank you, Catherine. I really, really like what you say about empathy there. I think that's such a great point to make. So Isabel, then, turning to you. Do we see a difference between company sales versus consumer? We heard a little bit about this, actually, from Lakshmi, didn't we?
Yes, we did. I mean, from Marvel, you can see that they're doing, particularly fantastically as far as those fleet sales is concerned. And I think, the right driver for that was the salary sacrifice schemes, where people can see a clear benefit. They're saving 40% because the money comes out before tax. The benefit in kind this year, I think, is 2%. Would that be right? Yeah. So the cost negative for owning an electric vehicle, if you're doing a salary sacrifice, is just not there. You may as well have one. It's probably about as inexpensive as using a petrol or a diesel car. But when we come to the buying public, there's no incentive for them to go out there and buy an electric vehicle at the moment, apart from saving the environment and having lower running costs. The actual price of the vehicle is off-putting. So we've got a bit of a price problem. And that comes from two reasons. One, we're all going into car showrooms and we're buying electric vehicles that we want to give 350, 400 miles range, when in reality, we probably only drive 20 or 30 miles a day. So number one, why are we doing that? Is there a maturity point in the market coming that's going to say people are going to go in and understand their daily requirements and they're going to buy a car that's suitable for those requirements? But also we need the manufacturers to come up with the range of vehicles so that people can still have their aspirant purchases. Most people that buy a Mercedes E-Class, if you're lucky enough to afford one of those, don't buy the top of the range one, they buy the 2.2 litre diesel. It's a lot harder to do that in the electric vehicle range where you've probably only got 2 or 3 models to choose from. So we need to have a greater diversity of models out there in the marketplace at different price points and different performance capabilities. And then I think we'll start to see overcoming the private buyers' reluctance to go into electric vehicles, because at the moment they're buying a capability they don't need every single day.
Yeah, great points there. Thank you, Isabel. And Dora, coming to you first then. So what role does charging infrastructure play in enabling EV uptake and getting those sort of consumers over that EV fence?
So I think the point around the range is really interesting, because if you have confidence in recharging quickly and recharging when you need to, then that range concern about needing 350 miles, maybe that helps that shift with what you might be looking to buy when you walk into that showroom. And I think then, to Catherine's point, we can say as Osprey, we've doubled the size of the network this year. We all know that maybe in this room, but people out there don't know that, and why should they if they haven't got an EV yet? So I think it is about trying to reach those people beyond beyond people already on the journey, or beyond people who maybe have that interest in sustainability, and giving them confidence in charging. We've started working with Instagram influencers, which is quite fun, and definitely gets us beyond the kind of echo chamber maybe that we might talk to in other places. So yeah, I think the confidence is super important for charging. And I think Melanie probably has some of the stats, but it's all about trying to reach beyond those initial audiences that we might have had so far.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Dora. Melanie?
I like the stats. Yeah, I think there's no question that charging charging infrastructure is one of the key barriers, because it always comes out in the surveys. Rishi even mentioned it in his speech, lack of charging infrastructure. And I guess I got sort of 3 points on that. So, firstly on the en route network, then a bit about at home, and then sort of consumer experience, which is real and lived. So firstly on the en route charging, which is what most people kind of consider that to be the kind of, especially people who don't have an EV, be the key types of charging. And I think it is a good news story. This time there's now around 10,000 devices. This time last year, there were 43% increase in rapid/ultra-rapid charges in the last year. I mean, that's a good news story. And there's definitely a shift towards these high-powered charging. So we're moving from the 50 kilowatt charges to the 150, 300, 350. You heard Toddington, he's going up to megawatt charging. There's a massive great shift there. And I think in parallel to that, the good thing is that people kind of know what consumers want in en route charging. They know they want reliable, they typically want hubs, so that they can go somewhere and find not just one charger, they can feel confident. And again, in the hubs, we've seen a huge increase. This time last year, there were 96 hubs, which we define as 6 or more rapid or ultra-rapid chargers. Now there's over 200, and that's excluding the Tesla network. So it's a massive increase, and of those, only 50 are, in fact, interestingly, at motorway services. So the other 150 hubs, they're at, they're like the Salmon's Leap hub down in Devon, or they're one of the GridServe forecourts in Norwich, or the NEC Solihull hub up in the Midlands. So that's really coming. I think the second point is on, we talked a lot today about those people who don't have off-street parking. There was a really good session with the local authorities earlier about, what do we do about this issue? And I think, there's no question there is an issue there. There's a lot of local authorities who haven't yet engaged for various different reasons. There's lots of really good exemplars. I mean, we've heard from Oxford City Council, we heard from Solihull, we heard from Suffolk, all different models. And I think part of the challenge is that there's not a perfect one-size-fits-all at the local area. So people have got to work through these issues. But with the Levi Fund, with lots of data helping people make decisions, I think that is getting better. And then my third point on this, I think, is all around the consumer experience. So, the reality is that there's a lot of people who have an amazing charging experience. And when we see hundreds of thousands charges go through ZapMap every single month, there's hundreds and thousands of happy chargers. But there is a subset of people who are not happy. They find a charge point that's not reliable. There are networks that are still not reliable enough. So it's incredibly important that as we think about the tech and the people, that we make sure we think about the consumer experience. And I'm hoping that the public charge point regulations are going to make a good start to that.
Thank you so much, Melanie. I'm continually disappointed with public charging infrastructure purely because I rarely need to use it, and I want to use it more because my car's got a range of 280 miles, which is more than enough to get to most of my destinations. And then generally, when I get to where I'm going, I just charge for a few hours, and there you go. But anyway, next question then. So as we know, the 2030 deadline has shifted. However, there are other policies in place. We have the zero-emission vehicle mandate coming in next year. We have the rules of origin as well under the EU-UK trade deal, where I believe that as of the 1st of January next year, unless the deadline is shifted out, then a 10% tariff will be imposed on electric vehicles unless more than 45% of components are sourced in the EU or the UK. So that could pose a challenge and impact costs. So Maria, to you first, what are your thoughts on other policies at play?
So I think that fundamentally it's unhelpful. I would at least go that far, perhaps even further, but it is unhelpful that on the one hand side, general public, and as much as I would like to join in with the optimism from Lakshmi and others around how we're already on this journey, etc., I do think that the overall message is we can all sit still, there's no urgency here, let's just wait and see. That is what I think is being conveyed from the government at the same time as putting in the ZEV mandate, making a massive financial incentive for the OEMs to really accelerate the rollout of EVs, and to do that what we've seen with the salary sacrifice scheme and other incentives is that if you have those positive messages, you can see results, but that's not going to be enough to take the next step. And so whilst the public and the businesses are kind of relaxing now, you have that incentive for the OEMs to keep pushing. And I think that's going to cause some interesting dynamics in the market next year. And it's not, like I said, it's not going to help acceleration. In fact, I was asked quite recently around, just to give some examples of what we could learn from Norway. And regardless of what you think about the policy, I think the one thing that Norway achieved was that the trajectory towards EV adoption was so steep that almost anyone in the market was happy to make an investment decision, safe in the knowledge that the payback period would be sort of 3 to 5 years, etc. What we're creating now is uncertainty, stopping businesses from making those investments because they don't know anymore how quickly the EV adoption will actually happen.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. And of course, we hear so much, or we have heard so much in the media about shifting back the date to 2035. We have heard less about the ZEV mandate, which is actually a real positive. Isabel, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I think the the ZEV mandate is really going to be the driver. I think pushing the banning of non-plug-ins, because don't forget it's not an internal combustion engine ban in 2030 as was. It was everything fundamentally had to have a plug or it had to be powered by hydrogen. So that included plug-in hybrids. So we've now pushed that date back to 2035, which means internal combustion engines and hybrids are now allowed until 2035. But we've still got the 22% ZEV mandate. So that's really going to be the driver that's going to be interesting. And I think it's really interesting that you mentioned about the rules of origin requirement. I was actually one of the people that was consulted when those numbers were being discussed around the time of the TCA being put in place. And really that was in there to make sure that we put a bit of a ring fence around Europe as far as the electric vehicle industry is concerned, so that we weren't importing cathode active materials, anode active materials, and some of the componentry like foils, 100% from abroad. That would encourage manufacturing to come into Europe and into the UK, and then there'd be a tariff-free trade between the two. So the rules of origin were put in place for a very good reason. And we had no diagonal accumulation, which meant that even if we had a free trade agreement with Japan, which we do now, we couldn't import into Japan and then export to Europe and have that classified as local content. So a really well thought out piece of legislation to put a ring fence around the UK and Europe. But unfortunately, that needed to come with an industrial strategy to make sure the incentive was there for business to invest in the EV supply chain. And that didn't happen. We really sat back on our backsides and did nothing about that. So we had the legislation, but no industrial strategy to drive industry towards that point. So what's going to happen? We're going to just import electric vehicles from outside of the European Union and outside of the UK, and you're starting to see a lot of Chinese vehicles coming in now. We can't blame the Chinese for this. We let them into the WTO in the early 2000s, and half the world pitched up and said, can you make that cheaper for me? And of course the Chinese said, yes, of course we can. So they became the industrial engine of the world, of the global economy. But really, if we want to start to break that and we want to make sure that we have value add for our economies, we have jobs, we have product that actually gets made locally, that conforms to rules of origin, we really need to get governments on board. And it shouldn't always be about subsidies. Subsidies are distorting. They make us make some decisions that we wouldn't do if we had a free market in front of us and we had lots of freedom to choose. But unfortunately, we don't live in that world. We have areas of the world that have high rates of subsidies, like the US with the IRA. The Chinese had a very long-term view, had a 20-year view of the battery industry going back 15 years, so I'm not surprised where we are now. But within Europe, we seem to be well behind the curve on providing those incentives for industry. And at the end of the day, we can't just sell finance and insurance to each other forever. We have to create national income from industry. We have to make things to sell to our people and to export to other regions, and that's how we get the income that we need to live our lives. So a big gap in policy at the moment, and that really does need to be filled.
Thanks, Isabel. That's really, really fascinating insight. I'm going to move on to the next question, if I may. We've got a couple to go through, and I do want to take questions from the audience as well. So thinking about cost, so how does cost factor in then? Melanie, do we think cost of charging is putting people off, or actually is it an enabling factor?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? When we asked, we'd recently done our 2023 survey of EV drivers, and we asked, what is the reason you've shifted over? And it's always the environmental and cost are sort of always vying for first position. And in fact, this year, cost came out as the number one. So it's still, EVs are still perceived overall cost of ownership as lower, which is a good thing. And then once you're charging on the public, or when you're charging, I think most people now know that charging at home is amazing, not just because it fits into your life, but also because it's significantly cheaper. Price cap now 28 pence per kilowatt hour, plus you can get that right down to maybe 7 pence if you've got an off-peak tariff. So prices are great if you're charging at home. Once you get onto the public network, it's different. We track hundreds of thousands of sessions and every month create a ZapMap price index, which then comes up with the average price that people are paying across the AC, or sort of the low-powered network and the high-powered network. So in September, that was 51 pence for AC charging or low-powered charging, and 76 pence for rapid/ultra-rapid. And that is an increase of at least 60% since the beginning of the energy crisis and 30% since this time last year. But the good news is it's broadly stabilised. So what we then did is then look at what would be, a typical. So we already know home charging. People who are charging at home, they are happy. But what about people who have a sort of a maybe 80% at home, 20%, or people who are just charging on the public network, 20% on ultra rapids, 80% on some kind of destination charger, and overall they're spending around 16 pence per mile, which is broadly equates to the same price for petrol and diesel. But of course, it gets lots better for your typical person who's mainly charging at home and only 20% on the public network, and then you're paying maybe 11 pence per mile. So I think, it's great. Lots of people are posting how they've saved loads of money, but for people who are just using the public network, I think it is a challenge. So, I think something needs to be done. We're all familiar with the Fair Charge campaign. We need to get that VAT equalised 5%, so there's not a double whammy. You can't charge at home and you have to pay more. So that's the thing. So in summary, I think it's a factor. Some people are really happy, some people not so.
Thanks, Melanie. And Catherine, if we can come to you next then. So just thinking about used prices for electric vehicles, which are dropping currently, what are your thoughts on where that's all going to head to encourage people to switch to EV?
Well, we know that price is still a significant barrier for most people. New EVs, on average, are still about a third more expensive than their petrol and diesel counterparts. There are actually only 9 electric vehicles with a recommended retail price under that important £30,000 mark. And we see many consumers on our platform, as you can imagine, engaging at a price point that is well below that level. That said, just to finish on new, we are seeing that over 71% of all new EVs on our platforms now have some kind of offer available on them. So a lot of them with 0% finance offers or with other discounts. So the market is absolutely beginning to shift, and price positions in that new car space are beginning to adjust, which can only support consumer demand. When it comes to the used car market is still very immature. It's growing very, very fast, but from a very small baseline. Earlier this year, as you alluded to, we did see a big influx of used electric vehicle stock, and that drove down prices. And encouragingly, we then did see that uptick in consumer demand. Actually, in August of this year, used electric prices were down over 20% year on year, and many makes and models are now achieving price parity with their petrol and diesel equivalents. Used EVs, that means, are now some of actually the fastest selling cars that we see on Auto Trader, because that pricing has corrected and we're reaching that point of parity. I think this is all positive for consumers. As consumer demand grows, the more consumers we know that experience the product, the more we will keep gaining momentum, because we know that consumers who do experience the product, who experience the whole ownership experience of an EV, are very unlikely to ever go back to owning a petrol or diesel vehicle.
Thank you, Catherine. And I think on the used EV point, then, the vast majority of people in the UK actually buy used cars, don't they, rather than buy new anyway. So that feels like really good news. Maria, just what about fleet then? Fleet transition, how's cost impacting transition for fleets?
So I think the fleet area is where obviously the most complexity is in terms of moving from an ICE vehicle to electric. And I think as part of that kind of overall cost A lot of people, even though we do have stats around how prices are moving, etc., I think a lot of businesses still consider EVs to be considerably more expensive, especially if you move up the sizes. Obviously, the heavier trucks are indeed much, much more expensive. But I think it's part of the transition and it's part of moving to EVs. The key bit for me is around understanding how you make that transition and making your business more efficient as you go along. I think those of us who are in the industry already, we know the efficiency that you can create by moving to electric in terms of the utilization of the vehicles, the routes, how you actually operate them, etc. And this is where a lot of the financial case can actually be made. But I think a lot of businesses are still stuck in this kind of, this is how we operate the vehicles now. We have 500 vehicles. We need to switch to 500 electric vehicles. That's going to cost us that much kind of list price. And this is how we're going to have to operate them. There's going to cost us more. We're going to have to install charging infrastructure, all of that stuff. So I think that sort of enablement of and facilitation of that journey is going to be quite important to get those businesses to want to transition.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you, Maria. So I'm going to skip to the final question here, and this is a quick fire round. It's turned into a quick fire round, okay, because we don't have much time. So in about 10 words or less, I'll start with you, Isabel. What are your predictions for next year when it comes to electric vehicle adoption?
So I think that we have a number of problems we've got to address. Yeah, so we have a supply chain problem, we have a price problem, we have a localization problem. And I really do hope that we start to, in this country, probably as we change government, change to a different view of the marketplace, different view of industry and how that needs to respond. Because I'd like to see more electric vehicles built here in the UK and the supply chains that feed them. Brilliant, thank you, Isabel. Catherine, over to you. About 10 words or less.
So I think we're at risk of losing momentum. The naysayers have been emboldened by the delay that we've seen. So we need a joint movement. We need to not stop talking as individual stakeholders, but just as the negative side of the debate seem to have got together and formed their own joint movement to address people's fears, we need to start forming our own. This is a big shift in technology and product for consumers, and we need to work together to help them go on the journey and overcome that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Catherine. Maria?
I think to maybe take a slightly different angle. So I think we're going to go from what used to be, shortages of electric vehicles, people having to sign up, getting deliveries in 12 months, etc. I think next year with the ZEV mandate, to the extent that product is available, we're going to see much more of a push from OEMs. The dynamics in the market is going to change entirely. So I expect a lot of what Catherine was saying around price differences, offers on EVs in terms of upfront discounts, all of that stuff. I think that we're going to see a lot more of that next year.
Brilliant. Thank you, Maria. Melanie?
I think we all know what we need to do. We talk about it all the time. So to me, 2024 is about execute, and just get it done.
Yeah, lots more chargers.
Yeah, more chargers.
Lots more chargers. No, I was going to say actually confidence, I think, confidence in charging. We've got consumer regulations coming in specifically around the consumer experience of charging, which I think whilst networks like Osprey already hit those things. Again, we need people to have the confidence and the trust that is happening across the board. And so having something that is official, that is a regulation makes a lot of sense there. And that convenience that I think fitting into a lifestyle that Auto Trader, your insights often talk about, people sit on that fence or they think, oh, this isn't going to fit into my lifestyle. I think hopefully, and feels like almost every year we say this, right? This is the year. But that word confidence in EV being something that whether you're a private driver and you don't have home charging right through to a fleet driver who maybe pays for your own charging because you have your own small business, that all those people can have confidence in the product and in the charging. And I think to do that, it's all about then that collaboration that all of us in this room have to have, and so that we're keeping the ecosystem that allows all those different consumers to see the convenience. We're creating that for them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dora. So I think we have time for about one question, maybe two if we're super quick. So a mic will come round if you want to raise your hand, and if you could give your name and who you work for, that would be wonderful. First question, yes.
me, I mean, I've been done about 12,000 miles in the last year, I suppose, in an EV, just started, I suppose. It's just maybe about trying to get a more joined up charging experience between different providers, you know, where you're having to go and download an app for a particular network, then you go to another, you know, charge up again, you're downloading another one. How do we sort of, how do we get to a more, a greater user experience? Because that could put you off.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really, really important point, and it wasn't one of my points, but you know, the consumer experience should mandate the contactless payment, both new points and retrospectively. So it's really important that all the charge point operators implement that. You know, that's incredibly important. But of course, that still leaves all the 7 kilowatts and below. No need for contactless at all, and some people like to, you know, pay digitally anyway. So it's so important, not just for ZapMap, but for all the other aggregators and all the charge point operators like Osprey. Or, you know, Osprey is an example who does open up, but opens up their network so that the aggregators, the people who provide the apps, can provide a really good experience to consumers. So, you know, I totally agree with you.
I don't think that big one you've put in Buckfastleigh is on the Tesla map either.
Because that helps.
Yeah, I have, but it wasn't on the map.
Yeah, Tesla has some
that's
rules
one
around
for
what they
you to,
show. Please keep charging them. And it will magically
anyway,
appear.
Thought I'd mention that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Okay, so I'm going to bring this session to a close then. We are a little bit out of time. But a big thank you to our panellists for this fantastic session. And thank you, of course, to Catherine as well, joining us online. And thank you to you, our audience, both in person and remote, for such an energised debate. You know, in a world where misinformation often clouds the EV revolution, as we all know too well, it's really refreshing to hear from experts who shed light on what is really a promising and bright future for e-mobility. Thank you.